Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January. As I kind of established back in December, my format for this is going to be where I talk about the stats first, and then I will talk about the DNFs, and then I will get into the books that I read pretty much in order of when I read them. This one's going to be a little bit weird since I read a bunch from one series. I'm going to group all of those together. And then the last book that I talk about in this wrap-up will be my favorite book of the month. January was a pretty good reading month for me, but I'll admit that it looks a lot better than it actually was. I read 9 books, but of those 9, only one was a novel. One was an essay collection, and then the rest were manga and novellas. So I was still in school in January, pretty stressed out, so I basically just mood read my way through and ended up having to catch up a lot in February, which I'll get into when I talk in my February wrap-up. But overall, good month. As far as genres go, I read 2 fantasy, 4 sci-fi, which is really exciting because sci-fi is one of the genres that I wanted to be reading more of. I read 1 nonfiction, and the 2 manga that I read this month were both historical fiction in the same series. I had 3 of the novellas that I read were rereads, which I did via audiobook. I read 2 new series, which I knew I was going to be adding more series as I went this year. So I started the Farseer series, and then I also started the Apothecary Diaries series, which is the manga. Then I continued 1 series, which is Murderbot, and thankfully, not because I don't love it, but because I have a lot of series to catch up on, thankfully I am nearly caught up with Murderbot now. As far as the goals that I had planned for myself that I mentioned at the beginning of this year, I did pretty well. I wanted to read 1 nonfiction each month. I managed that in January. I wanted to read 1 self-published book each month. I did not manage that in January, so that'll be something I'd like to prioritize going forward. 6 of the 9 books that I read actually came from my library, so yay! I'm actually reading the books that I need, that I have on my very full shelves and need to get to, so that is a huge bonus. I'm super happy with that. And then I also managed, of the a couple of challenges that I'm doing, one of the books that I was reading fit in the Our Fantasy Bingo, which I'll talk about when I get to that book. It was also my favorite book of the month, so I am very stoked about that. And then 2 of the sci-fi novellas that I read will count for the Space Invaders book, or Space Invaders reading challenge, so I'm also really stoked about that. If you want more information on the Our Fantasy Bingo Challenge or on the Space Invaders reading challenge, I'll leave links below. Our Fantasy is wrapping up, so this is a perfect time to get into it if you are curious about it. I believe it's going through the end of March, so there'll be new prompts in April. Then, the not so happy news, which is the number of DNFs I had in January, and this one is kind of a weird one. I had 6, but technically 4 of them are books that I finished at the beginning of February. Since I'm putting this up way late, I already know about those. So I didn't get them done in January, but I did end up finishing them eventually. But as far as January goes, they're technically DNFs. I have 2, however, that I have not finished as of February. I will probably come back to both of them, but they are very much on the back burner for me right now. The first one is Engines of Empire by R.S. Ford, and this one just isn't working very well for me. There's an issue I have with the writing style, and I don't particularly care for the characters. So I will attempt to finish this eventually, but it is really not a priority for me right now. The other one is The Humans by Matt Haig. This one is for a book club. Thankfully, it has been pushed back a little bit because I was not super into the beginning of this one, and it's really definitely another one that's kind of on the back burner. There are a lot of other books I'd rather prioritize. So that one is also, maybe I'll finish, maybe not. Now that I have talked about kind of my goals and some of the stats, I will get into the books that I did finish in January. The first one, I lumped all of the Murderbot books together because I read 5 of them, I believe. Yeah, I read 5 of them in January, and I didn't want to have it scattered all over the place, so I'll just cover them real quick. The first 3 of these I had read previously, and all of these I read via audiobook. The narration by Kevin R. Free is incredible. If you end up picking up Murderbot, I highly recommend at least doing the immersion read where you have audiobook and book together, if not just the audiobook, because he does such a stellar job with Murderbot. So the first one is All Systems Red, and I have to show off these covers because I think Tommy Arnold did an incredible job with them. But this is the very first Murderbot novella. It introduces you to Murderbot as kind of this, I guess you would call him a cyborg, but he's supposed to work as security for this group of scientists that have basically rented him for the duration of their excavation, and things go sideways, and Murderbot really just wants to be watching his serials, which are basically kind of like sci-fi soap operas, but he ends up having to save his humans in this one, and you really get a sense of his kind of snark level, but kind of the grumpy, I guess I'll take care of you guys because I kind of like you, but I don't want to admit it kind of vibe. And so that's this one. This one for me was a 9 out of 10. I adore Murderbot. There's not a huge amount of plot in any of these, but I think this one is probably still my favorite of all of the novellas, just because it's where you get that intro to Murderbot, and I think it's one of the most fun ones. Then I read Artificial Condition, which is where Murderbot basically teams up with a ship that he runs into in order to kind of track down some stuff that's in his past, or in its past. And it's very fun to see Murderbot interacting with other humans as well as kind of some more artificial intelligence. It's very fun, but I don't like this one quite as much. So this one was an 8 out of 10. I find the pacing to be a little bit shaky for me personally, because part of it is devoted to his past, or to Murderbot's past, and part of it is devoted to this new group of humans that he ends up helping out, who are relatively helpless humans, and the pacing's just weird to me, so it's not as good. The third one is unfortunately my least favorite of the Murderbot stories, and that is Rogue Protocol. This one, Murderbot basically, there's a group of antagonists that show up in the first novella, and in this novella, Murderbot goes to investigate kind of the past of these antagonists to see if they can basically dig up any more dirt on them. And I feel like of all of the Murderbot stories, none of them have a huge amount of plot. This has the least, and I didn't know why I was supposed to care about some of the things that were happening in here. I liked the interactions between Murderbot and another robot that he runs into that's kind of almost treated by a pet by its humans, but it's also clearly cared for, and kind of Murderbot struggles with that dynamic and understanding it and kind of settling it in its head. So it's not bad. It's still Murderbot, so it's still pretty fun. It's just very middle of the road for me. I just didn't love this one, so this one was a 7 out of 10. Then we have Exit Strategy, where Murderbot basically ends up teaming back up with the same group of humans from the very first book and ends up having to basically launch a rescue party. for some of them. So it is back to the Murderbot that I love, full of snark, but also full of a lot of heart, where he's teaming up with these humans that he really cared about, and kind of how they see him coming back into the picture. And I just really love that dynamic between Murderbot and its humans. So definitely one that I really enjoyed. This one was a 9 out of 10. And then the final one that I got to that's technically, as far as publication date goes, it is the last or the most current book in the Murderbot series. It takes place prior to the full-length novel, Network Effect, which I haven't gotten to yet, but I kind of switched it around so I'd be reading them basically in timeline order. And so this is Fugitive Telemetry. This one is kind of like a murder mystery type story where Murderbot has to help out the station security team on a preservation station, kind of overwhelmed, and this isn't really something that they do very well. So, or it's not something that they're equipped for. So you kind of get this interesting dynamic where they don't trust him because they know that he is a rogue sec unit, but man, I keep saying him. It's I think it's because Kevin Free does the narration, and so it solidifies him in my head, but it. So they don't trust Murderbot, but they kind of need to rely on it, and Murderbot's kind of trying to figure out still what it wants to do, and it's kind of in this weird category for humans where it's neither altruistic and under their control, and also nor is it a kind of rogue, violent, out of control thing. So they don't really know where Murderbot fits in, and Murderbot doesn't know where it fits in. So it's fun. I love murder mysteries, so of course this was an easy read for me, but this one was also 9 out of 10. Then, shifting from Murderbot, the other novella that I read was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho, and I just have to say I adore this cover. I think it's so beautiful. And I don't exactly remember the illustrator's name, but I'll post it here because I think she does remarkable work, so definitely love this one. And I actually really enjoyed this story. This was my first real introduction to Zen Cho's writing. It is a found family, wuxia-inspired story where you basically have this former nun who ends up teaming up with a group of bandits, and basically chaos ensues. It's delightful. It really did remind me of some of the martial arts movies that I grew up watching. And it's just the way they interacted was funny and also sweet in moments, and also kind of how the former nun had to win over their trust, and how they interacted with her was just brilliant. So I really, really enjoyed this one. It's a fun romp. And again, it really does have those found family vibes, so I would definitely recommend it. The one caveat I will say with this is there is a very different writing style for this than I think you get in a lot more Western inspired kind of fantasy-ish stories. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. There's just a cadence to the way that they talk that takes a little bit. But it did kind of remind me of some of the dialogue from, what's it called? Dial A for Aunties, which is also, this author is Malaysian, and then that author is as well, so I think it might just be a dialogue style from that part of the world, but if you're more used to Western inspired, it may come as a little bit of a surprise, but I'd still highly recommend this. The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water was a 9 out of 10 for me. It's really high on my list of favorite novellas, so definitely one I'd recommend. So then the next two I'm going to talk about is the manga series that I read. I got this from the library, so I don't have physical copies, but I'll post pictures of the covers here so you can kind of take a look at them. This is a historical fiction-ish. I don't read a lot of manga, so I'll try and post the category of manga that it fits, just because I don't remember off the top of my head. It basically follows this young apothecary who ends up basically getting stolen by a group who essentially sells servants, and she ends up getting sold to the palace, and ends up through a weird course of events ends up becoming like an official food tester for the palace, for a specific, I think it's one of the concubines that she ends up working for. And basically, she uses her skills as an apothecary to solve mysteries, and it's very cute, but it also has this kind of weird, raunchy sense of humor, and I really enjoyed it. Both of these were 8 out of 10, super like popcorn reads for me that I just kind of flew through and had a lot of fun. So I think there's a couple more volumes in this series before I'll be caught up with it, but I really enjoyed it. I loved the art for it, was super cute. So definitely one that I would recommend if you want kind of a fluffy manga to just dive into. Then I will talk about the nonfiction pick for this month, which was A Slip of the Keyboard by Terry Pratchett. I adore Terry Pratchett. I've been in love with the Discworld series since I was a teen. I have not caught up on all of them because I've just kind of been slowly reading my way through. I ended up picking this up because originally I was going to use it for the R Fantasy bingo slot for related nonfiction. I ended up not using it because it didn't fit for the hard mode, which I wanted. But I ended up reading it anyway. Like I said, I love Pratchett as an author. This is a collection of his writings across a fair number of things. He talks about the fantasy genre. He talks about being an author. The last kind of section of this collection is based on his writings about Alzheimer's and his kind of impending death. It's a little unfortunate that these were all grouped together because it's kind of a gut punch towards the end, but you really do get to see his humor and what a incredible, clever human being he was. So if you are at all a fan of Pratchett, I would highly recommend this. This was a 9 out of 10 for me. It does get a little bit repetitive, as all collections of kind of general writings and essays and stuff like that. I find this to be a common problem with these, which is why I don't often pick them up. But it's Pratchett, and I'll always love his writing. So definitely recommend if you're a Pratchett fan, or if you kind of want more insight into the way that he thought about kind of the fantasy genre and life in general. Now we are getting to my favorite book of the month. This was a read-along book. This was honestly a bit of a shock for me because when you say the words emotional roller coaster, slow-paced, super character-driven, no plot, no part of that sang out to me as a book that I would consider a favorite, not only favorite of the month, but favorite ever. And I genuinely can't imagine this author not being someone that I would just auto buy in a heartbeat. I don't know that she's writing anything new, but seriously, I would go out, if I had the money right now, I would go out and buy everything she's written. And it's probably not a surprise who this is going to be. And that is The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. And just a slight side tangent before I get into it. This illustrated edition is incredible. I will only show, so it's got this sweet map at the beginning, and then I will just show one of the illustrations at the beginning of this because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. But it's so pretty, so well done. I just absolutely love it. But like I said, this one is a new favorite. I go out of my way normally to avoid things that are described as tearjerkers or emotional roller coasters or just heartbreaking, because that really affects my mood usually, and sometimes it'll put me in a slump where I don't want to touch anything else. But I'm really glad that I picked up Assassin's Apprentice. This Robin Hobb's writing is beautiful. It's such the Assassin's Apprentice, you really live that world with Fitz. So it follows the story of Fitz, who is the bastard son of one of the princes in this world, and he basically kind of has to carve out a space for himself because he is a threat to the royal line, so they kind of want to keep him under control, and they end up training him as an assassin so that they can keep an eye on him and that he's not a danger to them as a potential rival for the throne. And this is very slow-paced, extremely character-driven because it's written in first person. You are following along with Fitz as he grows up from like 6 to basically being a teenager by the end of the book. And Fitz goes through some stuff. It is a heartbreaker. No one treats Fitz the way that Fitz deserves. But it's also, you get these really, really hopeful moments and great moments where Fitz kind of learns things about himself and starts to kind of get his feet under him. And then these heartbreaking moments where people just let him down, or decisions are made that they might have the best interest of the kingdom at heart, but poor Fitz, man. So it is an emotional roller coaster. I don't want anybody to go into this not expecting that, and don't go into this expecting like a hardcore assassin story. This really is not about Fitz becoming a badass assassin. It's really about Fitz growing up and kind of his coming of age story and the intrigues of the royal family. It definitely has a lot of political intrigue type stuff in it. It has some incredibly memorable characters, not just Fitz. There are a number, like I really liked Shade. I loved the Fool, who you get to see a bit of, but my understanding is you get to see more later. If you are an animal lover, just steel yourself now, because Robin Hobb is not kind, but she is an unbelievably talented author, and this is one of the best books I've ever read. I've never cried so much reading a book, but I've also never fallen so deeply in love with a world. I love the way she kind of like sneaks in some world building as you're going along in the story. I loved Fitz even when he was making decisions and it was like, oh buddy, oh, why are you doing that, man? So like I said, just an absolute roller coaster with Fitz. I keep saying that, but I don't know how else to say it. Highly recommend this if you are a character-driven reader. If you are a plot-driven reader, this may be a lot tougher for you because there's not a ton of plot, at least in this one. I think there's a bit more as it goes, but super plot-driven readers might want to shift to a different series by Hobb. Like I've heard Live Ship Traders has a little bit more for plot-driven readers, but seriously, so impressed with this. It just blew me away and was completely unexpected. So if I have a category for most surprising book at the end of the year, odds are pretty good this will be on it. So that was my mini gush fest about Assassin's Apprentice and my reading overall for the month of January. Let me know what you loved in February, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!